watching The Little Green Dot, a new show produced by 7 students from Nanyang Technological University, Singapore for the United Nations Environmental Programme Youth Climate Reports.
Singapore, one of the 4 Asian tigers, an economic miracle 47 years in the making. But much has been sacrificed in the pursuit of economic excellence. More recently, World Wildlife Fund named Singapore as the country with the largest carbon footprint per capita in the Asia-Pacific region. In response to this, the National Environment Agency said the city-state has no choice but to rely on fossil fuels because its small size limits it from switching to alternative sources. But are there other ways to reduce our carbon footprint? The Little Green Dot finds out what's being done to help save the environment in the area of transport.
Hybrid, natural gas or electric? What makes these cars green and what is the way to go? I went out in search for the answer and to find out why the government should do more to encourage the use of green taxis. With fuel prices steadily headed for the stratosphere, even the most hard-nosed taxi companies recognize that fossil fuels are not the way of the future. One of Singapore's newer taxi operators, Smart Taxis, has a fleet that runs on both compressed natural gas and petrol. The company says CNG is cheap and fairly abundant. It emits 90% less carbon monoxide into the ozone layer. Despite its prospects, CNG still has its fair share of problems. A tax of 16 cents per kilogram of CNG kicked in early this year, sending taxi drivers into a tailspin. Comparing 1 litre of CNG with 1 litre of petrol, drivers now have to pay $1.36 per litre of CNG compared to $1.43 per litre of petrol. To make matters worse, taxi driver David Chong tells us how CNG fueling stations are few and far between.
In year 2007, only Jurong Island, there's only gas station in Singapore. Then year 2008, mainland got 2, and now maximum to 4 CNG stations in Singapore.
For other taxi drivers, CNG cars not only spell inconvenience but also less engine power.
At this moment, I prefer petrol. Petrol first thing more powerful. Second thing, you any station you can pump. But this one you have to all the way come here.
Mr. Lan says that the average waiting time for refueling can be about 15 minutes. Coupled with the travelling time to CNG stations, the time taken is enough to earn $8 to $12. To help address the various problems that CNG taxis in Singapore are facing, Nanyang Technological University of Singapore and Technical University of Munich in Germany have partnered to design and build the world's first electric taxi. Here at the Research Techno Plaza, over 90 scientists and engineers are involved in this 5-year-long project. Started in April 2011, this project is part of TUM Create. Engineer Halim Witono tells us why they decided to focus on taxis.
The number of taxis in Singapore is only contributed to about 3% of the total vehicles in Singapore. However, the total mileage it consumed, the total fuel consumption can take out up to 14% of every single vehicle in Singapore. We also consider like different type of vehicles, a small family car or a bigger electric bus, and we realized that electric taxi can contribute to the most impact in terms of energy saving and well-to-wheel energy consumptions.
Apart from conserving energy, the taxi has a new design with added cabin space and a quieter engine, says TUM Create Corporate CEO Dr. Ulrich Stimming.
In the cities today is that there's so much noise actually from car traffic or trucks also. What you will have is actually much cleaner cities.
But will the electric taxi charge on in Singapore? Dr. Stimming says it will, provided the people and government support it. The final product will be a taxi built and tested by the TUM Create team, and a demonstrator vehicle will be released in 2014. This is Grace Chu in Singapore, reporting for the Youth Climate Report.
My name is Mark Conte. I am a postgraduate student in Green Business Management at Seneca College in Toronto, and I will be interviewing Gary Johnson, Professor of Energy, Ecology, and Green Buildings.
The roles of the colleges are primarily in orthopraxis, it's right action. And so the research that we're involved in tends to be applied research. My focus has been more on how do we operationalize, how do we realize the changes that are required in the environment and in our actions in the environment. So particularly I've been focused on the role of buildings in the climate change picture, and more specifically the role of those who operate and manage buildings. The most current information that's coming back from the UN would seem to indicate that the building sector is indeed the biggest lever that we have to address the climate change issues. The people that are responsible for those buildings, those that have their hand on that lever, are the building operators and building managers. So most of the effort that we have in our area in the Center for the Built Environment is about the training of building operations and building management staff to more efficiently manage the environmental and energy impacts of the operation of those buildings. This is not just the students that come in for daytime programs, but it's programs that are delivered in a number of modalities in Canada, from the Pacific to the Atlantic and to the Arctic, and delivered in a variety of different climate zones to small groups that are actively involved in management and operation of buildings, all the way through to those who are looking to enter into that field coming out of either high school or of university.
Can you tell us what you feel is the greatest climate change crisis facing us today?
I think most people will tell you about rising sea levels and issues around urbanization and transportation particularly. They'll talk about India and China and the growth that's there. My take on it is that the greatest challenge we face is human behavior. That the requirement to change our behaviors is something that as a people we haven't been very good at. And the solution to the climate change issue goes beyond technology, but goes into the realm of assisting people to both be in awareness of the environmental and energy impacts of their decisions, and to use that awareness to move them to change. That, for me, is the greatest challenge. It's motivating the change in human behavior.
And on a final note, what then would be your key message that you would give for the delegates listening to this?
Matthew Kelly, someone I admire very well, wrote that you can't get through a no unless you have a bigger yes. Because changing our behaviors means saying no to a number of the ways that we have wasted energy and we have polluted our environment in the past, because that saying of no is difficult to get through. The greatest challenge is to discover what is the bigger yes across cultures and across countries. It's not just economics, it's not just altruism. There has to be a personal, connected yes that will be the root, the anchor that people can use to change their behaviors.
Hello, dear viewers. I'm called Changwenina, the youth climate reporter from Cameroon. I would like to have an interview with my resource person. Good afternoon, madam.
Good afternoon, Nina. Have a seat.
Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself? Because I'm here to ask you some questions concerning climate change.
Okay.
In the community.
You're welcome. I'm Marvel Joyce from Youth Outreach Program, a community-based organization.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to know, what are some of the causes of climate change in your community?
Some of the causes of climate change in my community are sometimes, as you can see, my community is surrounded by a lot of trees, and our main occupation here in Bamenda is farming. So farmers do cut down these trees in order to have good farmland. As a result, of felling down trees, we are faced with a lot of climate changes.
Okay, thank you very much. Have you or your organization ever carried out actions to overcome climate change?
Yes, of course. We have been carrying out many actions to overcome climate change around Bamenda 1.
If I can see, you have many pictures up here from your past projects.
Yes, as you are seeing, those are people from community schools that are undergoing environmental protection by planting trees.
Okay, I can see a girl holding a seedling from a mango tree.
On that picture, you can see them holding the seedling, still waiting for planting. On this one, you can see the young people actively involved in planting. And by planting more trees, I think we will be able to overcome this issue of climate change.
Okay, let me ask you the last question. What can Rio do in order to eradicate climate change? You know that Rio is the upcoming conference in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, that will take place in this June 2012. So what do you think Rio can do to eradicate climate change situation in your community and worldwide?
Well, the activities of Rio cannot be minimized. They are having so many things that they are involved in, but I would like them to include environmental education in the school curriculum around the world, and best year back in Bamenda 1 in order to overcome this issue of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, dear viewers, the main causes of climate change here in Bamenda community is cutting down of trees. And as Marfo Joyce has earlier said, she would like farmers to limit the action of cutting down the tree, or if you cut down one tree, you should make sure you plant 2 or 3. Thank you very much.
Professor Paul Majewski is an internationally acclaimed scientist, explorer, and leader of over 50 scientific expeditions to polar and alpine regions of the world. He has received numerous honors, has over 300 scientific publications, and 2 books on climate change written for the public. I sat down with Dr. Majewski to discuss his research and thoughts on the future impacts of climate change.
Last few decades, I, along with my graduate students and many colleagues, have focused on the use of ice cores from all over the world. The Arctic, the Antarctic, Himalayas, Tibetan Plateau, the Andes, New Zealand. We focus on these records because they provide us a very, very robust view of past climate. They tell us about past temperature, precipitation, shifts in atmospheric circulation systems, increases and decreases in greenhouse gas levels, a variety of other pollutants, changes in the extent of sea ice, volcanic activity, forest fires. They're just a remarkable way of looking at the past climate system and actually also calibrating it to the modern climate system. Along with the teams that I've worked with and led, we've made probably 3 groupings of major discoveries in the climate system. The first was the identification that the climate system does not operate always in a slow linear way, that it can operate abruptly. In less than 10 years or in less than 2 years, you can have dramatic changes in temperature, precipitation, atmospheric circulation. The second big grouping is the impact of changes, natural changes in the climate system on past civilizations, leading very, very quickly to drought, increased levels of sea ice surrounding a region, both of which led to and contributed to, obviously, major changes in civilization in those regions. And the third, and perhaps most important, we provided the perspective that now allows us to understand that the climate system, the chemistry of the atmosphere in particular, is completely different than it has ever been in the past. Increased levels of greenhouse gases, but perhaps more importantly, rising faster than they ever have before, plus with a combination of increased levels of radionuclides, toxic metals, humanly engineered chemicals, and a whole variety of things that have never come together in the Earth system before to produce a climate similar to what we have today. If I had to sum up what I thought was the greatest climate change challenge for us right now and in the future, I'd use the word security. As the climate system changes, largely as a consequence of human activity, we will experience, and already do experience, dramatic impacts on human and ecosystem health. We are beginning to see increased frequency and magnitude of extreme events. We're seeing rise in sea level, which is going to become more and more apparent over the next few decades and centuries. And we're seeing tremendous differences in the distribution of water over the planet. As a consequence of climate change and increases in population, there are going to be regions of the world that are critically at risk as a consequence of drought. Society has a lot to think about for the future, and even right now there are big changes occurring already, and I think there are two big concepts that we need to really embrace. One of them is education. We need to understand much more as the public about what these changes are. Of course, warming is part of it. There is much more in addition to that warming and the impacts of that warming. The other thing that we need to think about carefully is what are the opportunities for the future? There are many things that we will not be happy about in the future, but there are opportunities. Building seawalls to the appropriate level rather than redoing them in 100 years. Looking for better ways to manage our economy, and considering the fact that our economy in fact might be based on water in the future and not oil. I'd like to take this opportunity to provide the delegates and the policymakers with two messages. The first is, please do not underestimate the potential for climate change in the future. There may very well be significantly more than one would assume there could be based on the models. The second is, do not assume that the climate system over the next few decades and centuries will operate in a linear, gradual way. We know from the past that it could change very abruptly, and we need to have models and thinking in place that allows us to deal with both linear and abrupt changes.
Hi, I'm Stephen Poon, graduating student of Green Business Management in Seneca College, and today I'll be interviewing Carmen Schlemm. She is the Coordinator of Environmental Technician, Sampling and Monitoring, Center of the Built Environment for Seneca College. Thank you. And so, what will be the message that you'd like to then deliver to the delegates and the policymakers?
The message that I would like to deliver is to consider that you are not talking about saving the planet or saving the environment. We hear this term a lot being used. Really what we're talking about is saving ourselves. So if people don't have time to adjust to changes that are coming down, if they don't show some kind of adaptation or evolution in the way we think about ourselves as people, we're going to be in for a really rough ride ahead. If we're given the time to be resilient and act like nature does and have time to change, then that is what is the best way to go about it. So I would say give us time to change.
Right, thank you very much.
بالنسبة للتغير المناخي عادة يعني أصابع العمل الفردي ما بتظهر فيه، لكن التغير في الطقس أو الناتج من عمليات التصحر والجفاف والتصحر دي بعض الأحيان بتعتبر كما يقال يعني ماميد أو مصنوعة بأعمال الإنسان، لكن البروسيسز الاثنين دي الأول بيدعموا بعضهم البعض. طبعا في سبب رئيسي وكبير جدا بيتكلموا عنه العلماء كثير، اللي هو طبقة تحت الأوزون الحامية للأرض والإشعاعات اللي بتأثر تأثير مباشر على حياة البشر وعلى زراعتهم وعلى إنتاجهم، حياتهم في أجسادهم، حتى الجسد بيتأثر. وحتى الآن في ناس بيفتكروا أنه التغير المناخي إذا نحن ما خلينا بالنا ويعني دعمنا الاستخدام الأحسن والأفضل والأنظف في كل الموارد المتاحة لنا ونحن مستخلفين فيها من الله سبحانه وتعالى، نحن مع الكلام ده احنا هيحصل في النهايه انه نفقد كل هذه الموارد، تصبح الحياه الارض ما عندها الامكانيات عشان تستمر، فتنتهي الحياه بطريقه او باخرى. يعني القدريين قد يقول لك والله كلها ما في يد الانسان، لكن الانسان عليه مسؤوليه كبيره جدا، واذا كان انت او اذا كان بلد ما اصبحت تستخدم الموارد استخدام جائر، يمكن الانتاج بتاعها يقل. فلما الانتاج يقل من مثلا الغله او البذره الطعام اللي بيستخدموه الناس، حيبتدي يضطر بدل مساحه صغيره كانت بتجيب انتاج كويس يمد يقطع زياده. يعني الواحد كان يتمنى التغير المناخي يكون ايجابي، لكنه حتى الان كله سالب. الحركه بتاعت الانسان، يعني التحرك بتاع المجتمعات في السودان وفي غير السودان كان محدود، يعني لانه الدستور والبلد غير مستقره، كل مره بتغير لزعزعه. في كثير من الاحيان مجتمعات كمجتمعات على مسؤوليه من الناحيه دي. يعني اذا كان الناس بيحافظوا على موارد المياه مثلا، او هكذا دي كلها اشياء الحكومه مستوجب عليها انها تقيم القوانين التي تحمي، وتقيم القوانين التي تراقب زياده الانتاجيه في كل هذه سواء كان انتاجيه الحيوان او المحاصيل، تمشي في الاتجاه الامثل بالنسبه لمواردك وبالنسبه لامكانياتك وبالنسبه لاقتصادك. فعلا الواحد يعجب بانه يشوف شباب بيحاولوا يسالوا عن مسائل يسهموا في حل هذه المشاكل، على الاقل بالتعريف بها في الوقت الحاضر. شكرا جزيلا.
Two of the pieces of work that we've been doing lately concern abrupt climate change. This is a kind of climate change where the climate system changes over a very large scale, and it's hard for the climate system to go back to the way it was before. And two of the types of abrupt climate change we've been investigating are changes in the big land ice sheets, Greenland and Antarctica, and also in deposits of methane on the ocean floor known as clathrates. And the discoveries that we've made in those areas suggest that abrupt climate change, due to major changes in land ice and due to release of methane from clathrates, may be much more severe than previously thought. So climate change is caused, of course, by emissions from humankind. Probably the biggest crisis is that we continue to emit carbon dioxide at a very rapid clip, and measures to try to slow down the rate of carbon dioxide emission really have not taken hold internationally. Our best understanding is that the emission of carbon dioxide by humankind is the primary driver for climate change. And in some sense, the biggest crisis that we face is that internationally, we have not started really coherent collective action by the whole of humanity to slow down those emissions. In terms of the effects of climate change, there are increasing signs that extreme climate change, this means short, rapid changes in the weather that are due to these emissions, are becoming more and more obvious as time goes on. So we've seen some very unusual weather patterns in the last few years. The reason why this is a crisis for humankind and also for the environment is that strange weather or extreme climate change is a real stressor for both humans and also for plants and animals. It sort of pushes the envelope for the kinds of weather that we're used to, and also that plants and animals are used to and are acclimatized to. So the more we see this strange weather, the more we'll be stressing both vulnerable human societies, but also vulnerable ecosystems that may be at the kind of the margins of their ability to adjust to rapid changes in their surrounding climate. In terms of solutions, a lot of the work that we're doing here at the laboratory and also at the University of California in Berkeley is devoted not only to understanding the origin of the problem, but also in looking at a variety of really innovative solutions for generating energy in a truly sustainable way. And so Berkeley Laboratory has created a program called Carbon Cycle 2.0,
which is designed basically to move on to a new realization of the world's carbon cycle, but one in which it's sustainable long term, and by long term I mean centuries to millennia. Berkeley now has a coordinated program launched in the last couple of years devoted to understanding and developing new ways of producing energy and on the large scale in a truly sustainable fashion. So the solutions involve transitioning our energy systems away from carbon-containing fuels to carbon-neutral or carbon-free fuels. And I'm happy to say that both Berkeley Lab and University of California, Berkeley are at the forefront of research in those promising areas.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about your own research into and your personal contributions in your work here to kind of that project you had here at Berkeley Laboratory?
So I'm afraid most of my research is devoted to characterizing the problem, basically understanding what will happen if we continue on business as usual. So if we were to continue emitting carbon dioxide, what the climate would look like in the future. The work in my department and my group here is devoted to really understanding how the carbon cycle and how we're perturbing it, how those changes the carbon cycle interact with the rest of the physical climate system. And in some sense, we're sort of looking at a variety of forms of abrupt and extreme climate change that may come to pass this century if we don't alter our course of action. On the upside, the work that we're doing, we're building a new type of climate model in which the energy market and human beings are actually included as part of the model. And the idea now is to look at a coherent, integrated model to explore solutions. So with this new kind of model, we can project what would happen, for example, if we were to deploy carbon capture and sequestration on a large scale. How much environmental and climate change benefit would that have? If we were to deploy biofuels on a large scale, either cropped or more exotic types of biofuels, how much benefit would we see from that kind of deployment? So we're taking the climate model, which traditionally is sort of a crystal ball for all the bad things that could happen, and trying to turn it into a tool that will allow us to project the benefits from moving on to a more sustainable pathway. Looking at the combination of research in basic energy technology and also forecasting how those advances in energy technology will play out as we take them to market and begin to deploy them on a large scale. So again, building this crystal ball that allows us to look from the genesis of energy technologies in the laboratory to how they would play out in the market and at the state, local, national, international level, building that sort of that tool to really look out ahead and make sure that energies are deployed as best as possible. That'll be another major thrust for us going forward.
My name is Afroz Lahsai and I'm a graduate from the Environmental Site Remediation Program at Seneca College, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Atif Mohammed, an environmental sustainability researcher at Seneca College.
I think one of the emerging issues now that's discussed in relation to climate change is the issue of resilience and resilient development. I think this is a very important topic that has to be further developed through research and discussion that can really help move many of the goals in terms of mitigating climate change through looking at different approaches and different technologies.
Thank you. What do you believe is the great climate change crisis facing the world today?
I think one of the great climate change crises is that we see a great disparity between the impacts of climate change and where the sources of many of the sources of where many of the factors that are causing climate change are occurring. So in the most industrialized parts of the world, for example, we see that they're often the point source emitters of, for example, of CO2 emissions, but it's often the least developed parts of the world who are suffering the consequences of that.
Thank you. Do you have an idea how we can correct this problem or protect ourselves from its dangers?
I think one of the means is to create avenues where we can facilitate the exchange of knowledge, technologies, and funds to help least developed nations and create greater partnerships between industrialized and least industrialized nations to help mitigate many of these problems.
Thank you. Would you like to provide a message aimed directly at delegates and policymakers?
To the delegates and policymakers, I hope that through this conference that the issue of resilience and the issue of biocapacity is discussed and developed even further. I come from a country, Yemen, for example, the southern part of Yemen, and unfortunately Yemen is suffering through a severe water crisis, and the capital itself, Sana'a, may be the first capital in the world to run out of water relatively soon. So, and that's one country, and there are other countries throughout the world who are under similar environmental constraints. So providing the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of technology, and with greater cooperation, I think that this will help mitigate various difficulties and create a greater global cooperation and collaboration, and move towards a more equitable development throughout the world.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I'm a youth reporter. I would like you to introduce yourself. We are going to talk about the climate change situation here in your community.
Right. Okay, my name is Patrick Akezi. I work for VSO as the Organizational Development Advisor for NOEFO, which is the Northwest Farmers Organization based in Bamenda.
Can you please share with us the main causes of climate change here in your community?
The main causes of climate change in my community in Cameroon are quite different from what I'm used to where I come from. In the West, there are a lot of factors, which are slightly different from what it is in Cameroon. Here in Cameroon, there's quite a lot of factors that affect climate change, like the sewage system is not well developed, the exhaust fumes, the pollution in the air, the use of different types of fertilizer which people use to increase their produce, but without actually knowing the impact that it has both on the land and also on the climate. And sometimes people complain about the fact that they are not getting enough yield or enough rain in some areas, and they do not realize that the impact of what they've done last year is actually affecting the amount of rain that they have having, or the volume of rain in their area. So there are, those are some of the major factors in Cameroon. You have the pollution, the use of fertilizer, use of some acidic products, which evaporate into the air and cause damages to the environment.
Okay. What are you doing, or what does your organization doing to fight against climate change?
Well, NOEFO has been working very hard with various farmers, because we work with a large number of farmers in the whole of the Northwest. But NOEFO has been working very hard with the key farmers, the large-scale producers, to reduce the impact of climate change. And the way they're doing that is actually to encourage them to use less fertilizers and use less harmful products on their farms, such as pesticides and those sort of although they help in terms of your produce at the end of the day, but they also cause damage. But there are other safe, more organic rather than inorganic methods of actually killing these pests, which does not cause so much harm to the environment. So that's what NOEFO is actually encouraging the farmers that are members of NOEFO to do more of. And it's actually taking hold, and it's working very well as far as I'm aware.
Okay, thank you very much. That was an interview presented by Bukenina, the youth climate reporter from Cameroon. Thank you.
Climate change is one symptom, but just one symptom only, of a much greater problem of human ecological dysfunction. The human system, the whole of the human enterprise, has already exceeded the carrying capacity of the planet for human beings. The work we do is in terms of something we call ecological footprint analysis. Ecological footprinting attempts to identify, to quantify the total area of ecosystems required by any specified population to produce all of its resources and to assimilate its important wastes. And what we have found is that the total human eco-footprint already exceeds the biocapacity of the planet. Carbon dioxide, one of the principal drivers of climate change, is the single largest waste output in all industrial economies. So we have a dilemma. The dilemma is this: we're already in excess of the global capacity to assimilate carbon dioxide, and yet 3 billion people live in more or less poverty. This means we can't possibly hope to raise those people to a decent standard of living using any existing technologies without completely destroying the capacity of the Earth system to sustain human beings. We need carbon taxes. We need cap, auction, and trade systems in place so that the price of fossil fuel tells the truth about the ecological damage costs of its use. And until that happens, this problem will not be solved. We need a global scheme in which the rights of access to the world's carbon assimilation capacity is allocated to countries on a per capita basis. Each human life is equivalent to every other human life. And that would mean that countries like Canada or the United States, which use 4 or 5 times as much fossil fuel as the average person, would be stuck with only the rights of a person in a very poor country who is underutilizing his or her access to the atmosphere. So that means we would set up the basis for a global trade in carbon rights. In other words, let's cap the emissions of carbon dioxide at the level that is assimilatable by the atmosphere. Allocate the remaining capacity equally to people around the world. Countries that are underutilizing their capacity would have excess rights. Countries like Canada, the United States, Europe that are overutilizing their fair share would have to buy those rights from other countries. So we'd have a global system of cap and trade in carbon rights based on the fundamental rights of individuals being equitable. We can no longer operate as individuals or even as individual countries. It's not possible for any single person or any single city or any single country to become sustainable on its own. We're all on the same ship. The ship will either sink with all of us or float with all of us. This is a collective problem requiring collective solutions, and that means that we come together as a global community, forget the politics, in order to conserve life on Earth, or at least the prospects for civilized human existence. We need a global strategy in which we must reduce our carbon emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions by 80% before the middle to end of this century. My primary message was that people stop being either optimistic or pessimistic, simply get realistic about the nature of our situation and start acting as if the science meant something. You know, humans claim to be a species of high intelligence, capable of logical analysis. We claim to be capable of forward planning. I teach in a planning school. The assumption is that we can take available information and plan for a better future. We claim to be a species capable of making moral judgments. So there are three qualities that make us human and raise us above all the other life forms on the planet. And yet, when you think of it in the collective sense, there's no evidence that the world as a community at any of the climate summits so far has applied collective intelligence to these problems. We are not planning as if we have a stake in the future, and we're certainly not extending our moral judgment to recognize that it's simply morally and ethically inappropriate for the rich to continue to consume 4 or 5 times their fair share of the world's fossil fuel resources and to use 4 or 5 times their fair share per capita of the world's assimilation capacity. So, my message is get human, be intelligent, plan for the future, and exercise your moral judgment. And if we do those 3 things on a collective level, this problem will be solved.
A recent rash of incidents involving public bus drivers losing their way on routes and several train breakdowns resulting in lengthy service disruptions have left Singaporeans frustrated with public transport. But few have little choice but to put up with the inconvenience. One man saw the potential in creating a network of shared bikes to complement existing public transport. Now, this is one of the stations where members of Isuda Bike Share can, for a monthly fee of $20, grab a bike at any time. Mr. Francis Chew, co-founder of Isuda Bike Share, was inspired by the success of various bike-sharing systems in Europe and sought to apply the same model in Singapore.
I have been monitoring the bicycle share scheme from different parts of the world, like Paris and London. What I noticed when a successful bike share is implemented in a city, it helps to create a bike-friendly environment for the city. So I want to see the same change in Singapore.
His scheme serves a dual purpose, enabling Singaporeans to live a healthier life, as well as adapting the current model of transport in Singapore into a potentially greener and more efficient system by curbing over-reliance on buses.
It will make Singapore a lot greener, a lot less dependent on oil resources, and at the same time produce less carbon dioxide. And generally, these are all positive indicators for Singapore.
These changes will take some time to gain momentum, as not all Singaporeans may be receptive to the idea of using bicycles for daily transport. But one thing is for certain, bicycles have the potential to get you closer to your destination than any bus. Many Singaporeans were positive towards the concept.
Nowadays, the MRT, there's been a lot of breakdowns and stuff, so it's a better way for us to get to work easier, get to work faster or get to school faster.
I think it's quite good an idea. Firstly, I think being squeezed in buses and MRTs are quite boring routinely every day. So sometimes I may want to switch to bikes. And personally, I like cycling a lot. So I think it would be a good idea.
However, one highlighted a potential demographic which might not be as receptive to the idea.
I think the bike sharing system for school students like me is actually not really that impactful for us, because for us, right, our bus ride to our school is actually free, so we would rather take the bus, which is more comfortable and because there's aircon, than to take the bike.
Of course, riding a bicycle well will take some getting used to. This is Daryl Christian in Singapore for the Youth Climate Report.